Okay, so good evening, everyone. Good morning, probably in some areas in the world. So it's a pleasure to be with you again. And this is one more webinar as part of the Innovation and Precision Eye Health webinar series. And today we really have the pleasure of having an exceptional speaker and neuro-ophthalmologist and visual neuroscientist, Prof. Dan Milea, with us. So I'll introduce Prof. Dan Milea and to you. Well, for those of you who don't know Dan, Dan is a leading figure in neuro-ophthalmology. He is currently serving as chair of neuro-ophthalmology department and the head of the Rothschild Visual Neuroscience Brain Lab at the Rothschild Foundation Hospital in Paris, France. He also directs the Rothschild Institute of the Optic Nerve and Glaucoma, which, if I understand correctly, has recently been founded by Prof. Milea. In addition to this, he has multiple roles in France, but he holds also a position still in Singapore, because Dan spent probably 12 years in Singapore, where he was the head of visual neuroscience and my mentor at the Singapore Eye Research Institute. So Prof. Milea has co-authored and authored multiple publications, over 250, published over 25 books. His research focuses on optic neuropathies and the use of AI, artificial intelligence, in ophthalmology, but more specifically in neuro-ophthalmology. He also has worked on other means to detect eye diseases, such as chromatic papillometry and eye movement, and he serves as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Neuro-Ophthalmology, and he has delivered multiple lectures worldwide and is ranked in the ophthalmology top power list worldwide for 2025. So Dan, it's a pleasure to host you for this webinar. Thanks a lot for agreeing to give a talk. So we'll let you give your talk, and at the end, this session is co-hosted by Professor Clement Tan, who you know very well, who is a colleague also in Singapore. So Prof. Tan is a senior consultant in the Department of Ophthalmology at NUH. He's also the Group Chief of Ophthalmology for the National University Health System and the Director of the Division of Graduate Medical Studies in Singapore. And he's also a neuro-ophthalmologist. So thanks a lot, Clement, for joining us for this session. And an exception for this webinar as well is that we have a PhD student who will also be in the panel list. And so I would welcome Daniela, who is a PhD student in the Eye and Brain Research Group, my group at NUS, who is also focusing on new ways to detect, but also improve quality of life in patients with eye diseases. So with that, Dan, thanks again for agreeing to give this webinar. We are all ears and eyes for what you're gonna be delivering us today. So for everyone else, don't hesitate to ask questions in the Q&A section. Oh, to you, Dan.
Thank you so much, Ray. This is really an incredible privilege to be with you. Your series have become famous everywhere, worldwide. So this is really nice. There's only one thing I quite disagree with you, is that when you said, you know, I mentored you, I think you taught me just as many things as you know. I learned so many things from you as well. So it was really a high pleasure. Also, very big pleasure to be with Clement. With Clement Tan, we used to work together, collaborate on many things, sharing ideas. A very dynamic and interesting relationship over many years. So we've met, Clement. I'm not going to say it when, but it's been a pleasure over so many years. So Daniela also had a chance to meet her 1 week ago. So I think it's an exceptional opportunity. The hardest thing is going to come now to share my screen. I hope. Do you see my screen now?
Yes, we do.
Awesome. Right. Awesome.
Perfect.
So
yes,
that's great. So I will just start by somehow provocative title. Can ophthalmologists, can the functions, the role of ophthalmologist morph in the future? Can ophthalmologists play a role to detect brain diseases? Probably yes. And as Ray has kindly said, I'm a neuro-ophthalmologist based now in Paris mainly, but also in Singapore. I'm just left Singapore 24 hours ago. And I also, I'm a field professor in Copenhagen. These are my disclosures, two very generous grants, one from France, one from Denmark, and I'm the co-editor-in-chief of Neuro-Ophthalmology. And by the way, if you guys have interesting things to publish, we are an international journal and welcoming good papers. Please do not hesitate to contact us if you have good things to publish. So as acknowledgements, just to show you, this is my current group of research in Paris. It's the Rothschild Brain Lab. We're doing a lot of visual and computational neurosciences. I think what's very interesting in my lab is that a majority of those researchers, who are, by the way, very young, a vast majority are AI engineers, neuroscientists, and very, very few doctors. And I think that's where the future goes. All innovations will be heavily supported, I think, in the future by non-medical doctors. And that's one of the, the common questions that comes up on those webinars or sessions is, who should lead the way? Is it medical doctors or AI engineers? And probably both. I'll come back to that a bit later. So this is my lab in Paris, Brain Lab, brain meaning building research with artificial intelligence in neuro-ophthalmology. And I think this logo illustrates our philosophy. We're using the eye to understand the brain. We're looking into the brain via the eye using neural networks, but more largely other ways to investigate the retina, which is a wonderful way to understand more about brain. And in fact, it is interesting because those of you who are ophthalmologists, if I'm showing you this image, I am sure that pretty much nobody in this audience would take the bet to tell me if this is a female or a male patient. And machines nowadays, we have done that, and many others have done way before us, we're able to predict the gender, age, weight, if there is a smoking. And I think that's one of the most surprising ways to look into the retina to understand systemic factors, parameters, and to assess cardiovascular risk by the calcium score, which is an investigation which is traditionally made by radiologists with CT scans, implying radiation, cost, and many other problems that can be solved with the fundus picture within seconds, basically. And this is a software that has been approved in South Korea, as you probably know. But beyond that, also, just looking at the fundus picture, softwares are able to determine now the stroke risk or even Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's is one of the key issues, a societal problem these days, just like other neurodegenerations like Parkinson's disease. This is a wonderful study by Siegfried Wagner and the group of Perskine and Moorfields. Looking at the UK Biobank, they were able to determine as a group the risk of developing Parkinson just by looking at the retina. They were able to predict development of Parkinson's 7 years before the first motor sign was present, which is absolutely remarkable. As you know, Parkinson is a pathology of alpha-synuclein, and alpha-synuclein is also present in the retina. And just doing large studies at very large levels, it is possible to identify changes in the retina, although the specificity of those results is probably not well assessed for now. So Alzheimer's has been a real concern, and this has come into the media. And in fact, this is the group led by Tianyin Wang and Carol Cheung, Christian from NUS, by the way, who is the main neurologist, who is a very, very strong supporter of the eye as a window into the brain, and Alzheimer's in particular. And this is a paper that we published a couple of years ago in the Lancet Digital Health, showing that it is possible to discriminate between patients with Alzheimer's and non-Alzheimer's just on very trivial pictures of the retina and the fundus. Interestingly enough, in this study, by evaluating, including patients not only with comorbidities, meaning macular degeneration, other glaucoma, and other ophthalmic comorbidities, helped to distinguish between Alzheimer's versus non-Alzheimer's, which raises a very important question. Is there such thing as an Alzheimer's retinopathy as there is diabetic retinopathy? And recent super interesting studies have suggested, this is a few days old study, showing that in a very particular form of Alzheimer's, which is an autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease, there are lesions within the retina that do not seem to be very specific to us ophthalmologists. But doing pathology on the same tissue and matching the fundus picture with the pathology of the retina post-mortem, these are eyes collected in a patient after death with confirmed autosomal dominant Alzheimer's, show that those lesions were exactly the ones corresponding to beta amyloid deposit and tau protein. And neurologists were very interested at the beginning by this study, but then rapidly they thought, what's the point to diagnose Alzheimer's? Because there are new treatments, and lecanemab is one of the treatment that has been approved, FDA approved, in patients especially with mild cognitive impairment or very early Alzheimer's. And again, a pioneering group from Singapore, this is Leopold Schmetter, and again, Chris Chen from NUS, has shown a couple of months ago that Alzheimer's can be detected on OCTs, even at very, very incipient stages, exactly where treatments can apply. So this is a major breakthrough, I think, in this area. And even more provocative is that not only fundus pictures and can be used for and associated with AI, can be used for brain diseases and brain health. It can work also for psychiatric disease. This is systematic review of various studies showing that schizophrenia or also depression can be detected just with AI on fundus pictures. But our problem as clinicians is probably more trivial, I would say, more practical, more pragmatic, is that the doctor is out. As we all know, there is a lack. Singapore is very special in that respect because there are enough neuro-ophthalmologists, but the United States, they are lacking dramatically neuro-ophthalmologists. There should be one neuro-ophthalmologist per 1 per million inhabitants. That's absolutely not the case in Europe, in the United States, and also in many countries in Asia. So this has been clearly assessed that there is a lack of supply for neuro-ophthalmologists in the United States. And our thought was that could new technologies associated to new softwares and AI methods mitigate this problem. And this is a serious problem, not only because there are not enough neuro-ophthalmologists, but because neuro-ophthalmic errors can be dramatic, as you know. And this is a very interesting study showing that among 500 referrals to Atlanta, a group from Atlanta, Valerie Buse and Nancy Newman, around 500 referrals, 50% of patients referred had the wrong diagnosis. So that is quite scary. So basically, this institution could readjust the referral diagnosis. So we need not only neuro-ophthalmology expertise, but also the quality of the diagnosis. Well, this is not the case in such a situation where there's very severe hemorrhagic papilledema in fulminant intracranial hypertension. But situations can be more difficult when looking at such a fundus. For instance, this is a real life situation of a patient who has some complaints, very mild visual complaints, of visual loss in his right eye. But looking more carefully, you probably notice that there is an optic disc swelling in his right eye, but there's also a bit of pallor in the left eye. So an expert neuro-ophthalmologist will immediately qualify this as a Foster-Kennedy syndrome, which tells a lot about what's happening in the brain, probably a chronic compression in the left optic nerve causing optic atrophy, and subsequently causing intracranial hypertension, which is nevertheless manifest only in the right eye because the left axons are already dead. So this type of clinical expertise takes time, and availability of doctors is not good. In this very precise situation, an MRI was done immediately in this context. It was surprising to see that the patient had a quite bad glioma, which caused optic atrophy in the left eye and then intracranial hypertension subsequently, as you know. The patient had no other symptoms. So patients who are coming to the emergency room or to the neurologist or even just for regular checkups can have optic nerve abnormalities that are absolutely critical to be diagnosed. So for all these purposes, in 2018, at a time where artificial intelligence was picking up, remember the first studies using artificial intelligence and deep learning were published in 2017 for diabetic retinopathy, where the numbers are quite massive. The study by Google and then the study by Daniel Ting and Chen Wong in Singapore, showing that deep learning can identify diabetic retinopathy. So together with Raymond at that time and with Ken and with two major neuro-ophthalmologists in the United States, Nancy Newman, Valerie Buse, we thought, why don't we just put together a consortium and to raise enough patients and collect their data to try to understand and to diagnose optic nerve conditions. Well, a couple of months fast forward, we met incredible enthusiasm worldwide. These are probably the most, not all, but a few of the neuro-ophthalmologists, very famous neuro-ophthalmologists and extremely talented and very enthusiast neuro-ophthalmologists, but also computer scientists who were happy to help and to contribute throughout the world to have a large data collection. You recognize, I'm sure, many of them. Neil Miller, for instance, from the United States, Patrick Yuaiman, many from everywhere. Ambika from Chennai, for instance, for those who are from India, and many others. And this was Bonsai in 2024. 44 centers from 23 countries still communicating, and you see the small little red dot in Singapore, which concentrated all this data and the knowledge, the AI knowledge to be able to make sense of all the collected data. And this is the detail at that time. We're talking about 2018 and 19 now, and this is the data we're looking at various optic nerve conditions from many countries. And this was quite particular because the patients, the data was collected with many cameras in patients with various multiple ethnicities throughout the world, as you can see. And so we've collected in the end 15,000 images, and developing a deep learning method for in a training system. And then we tested that in 5 different cohorts, again, in the United States, in Copenhagen, in Thailand, in Tehran, and in Bangkok. And look at the performance, which was absolutely stunning, was very high, not only for papilledema, but neurologists were even more interested by normals, because what neurologists want to know are the optic nerves normal. For instance, a patient coming acutely with severe headache, of course, the resources are not there everywhere to be able to do an MRI on all those patients or some sort of brain imaging. So how cool is that for a neurologist to be sure that just taking a simple picture that costs $1 or even less, an algorithm could inform them that there is nothing wrong with the brain. So the negative predictive value was extremely important for them. Well, what is interesting is that our data, we're talking now, our results were around 2019, and we sent our manuscript to a good journal, and the first response of the journal said moderate interest. One of the reasons being that deep learning was still very young, and there was a very serious concern that deep learning is just a a hype, and deep learning will disappear. But when looking at the data and showing that analyzing optic disc images and the optic nerve, we could tell things about the brain. They were quite interested, and we finally made it into this journal, which was the New England Journal of Medicine. And I really have the high honor to share the first authorship with Ray and with 60 authors, real authors, and another 60 collaborators, 120 co-authors in total for this paper. It took us several days just to rank the co-authors to make sure that nobody's left out. There was such an incredible enthusiasm to make this happen. And what is interesting is that this was, in fact, the first. I had this confirmed recently by one of the associate editors of the New England Journal. This was the first article ever published by New England Journal of Medicine using deep learning. And there aren't that many. Ophthalmology is very difficult to make it. Recently, there was another paper a couple of days ago about prosthesis, visual prosthesis. So it is very difficult for ophthalmologists to publish in the New England Journal. We had this chance. And not only that, but we had an editorial by Isaac Kohani, AI for the Eye, saying that using deep learning methods in the future will probably help doctors to better understand the brain and to diagnose brain conditions, which is exactly the point I'm trying to make. Very interesting. The fact that Isaac Kohani became subsequently the editor-in-chief, and he is still currently the editor-in-chief of a new journal, which is called NEJM AI, dedicated 100% to AI. And you might ask me, okay, this is cool, but what's the use of this? I'll just show you a patient who was referred with suspected venous thrombosis because he had bad headache. And the doctors were wondering if the patient has papilledema. And I don't know if you see well enough, but I can tell you, I'm not very sure that this could be very full discs or could be optic disc drusen, a differential diagnosis. It's not very obvious clinically just by looking at the pictures that this patient has papilledema. So we asked the machine, could this be papilledema? And the probability of papilledema as assessed by the algorithm, by the Bonsai algorithm, was quite high. And of course, under these circumstances, you really don't want to miss papilledema, except that the doctors judged that their knowledge is more important than what the machine thought, and they discharged the patient. Unfortunately, the patient came a couple of days later and look at the optic disc. Now, we tested again the algorithm, and of course, the probability now was close to 100%. So, will those methods become standard practice in the future? I'm not sure. I don't know, for various other reasons, which is cost effectiveness, other things that may be discussed later. But at least the science is there. Those machines are able to identify papilledema. And it's not surprising that in this very severe case, the probability of papilledema as judged by the machine is close to 100%. Again, against normal 0.6 and other abnormal 4%. Well, this is not surprising. What is more surprising is in this patient with the quality of the fundus, which is not great, and looking at the optic disc, it might look a bit swollen, not very clear, but to be able to say that this is papilledema, this is not optic disc drusen, this is not incipient NaION, for a clinician can be very difficult, yet look at the confidence of the machine to state that this is papilledema. And the reason for that is that the machine has looked at so many patients and images that were sent and assessed by top-notch neuro-ophthalmologists worldwide. The machine learned so much from all those previous assessments over many, many years. And then we moved from fundus pictures to OCT with a new method that was implemented by Michael Girard. You probably know him. He was in Singapore as well at CERI. Now he's in Atlanta. And we were able to create a model to discriminate between true papilledema, which is a life or vision threatening condition, versus optic disc drusen. and Michael Girard, who developed wonderful methods of OCT digital staining, but also modeling of the conditions. Segmentation of the images shows clearly a big difference between papilledema and optic drusen with very high performance. One of the cool things that could be applied, I still believe, in real life situations. The next question that we asked ourselves was, could the machine be better than a neuro-ophthalmologist? And for this purpose, we asked Nancy Newman, Valerie Buse to join us in Singapore, and they were literally fighting with a machine, with a computer. So for this purpose, we, Ray, you probably remember the very intense sessions when we provided them 800 optic disc images, and they were so determined, both Valerie and Nancy, to do the best and to show that human expertise is still the best thing versus machines. And look at the results. Their time was absolutely stunning. I wouldn't dare. I was lucky to be too much involved with this study, not being authorized to play this game. But looking at 800 very complex images with NAION, optic drusen, with sometimes combined diagnosis within 1 hour plus for a human, I think that was absolutely stunning. The machine, obviously, 25 seconds. And what is interesting is that when we retested, obviously, the same data set, the computer would provide exactly the same performance that I'll show in a second within the same time, irrespective if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, irrespective if other conditions, humans being on call or being at 2 o'clock in the morning, or stressed for many other reasons, the machine will just provide exactly the same performance, which was close to 90% in both situations, which made us think that experts are just as good as AI. The next step is that we try to compare the performance of the machine with more, I would say, non-expert ophthalmologists and neurologists also, as well as internal medicine. And this is a paper that we published in Journal of Neuro-Ophthalmology, Raymond being the senior author on this paper 2 years back. And I will not show you the results because they are way too embarrassing for us clinicians. The machine was so much better. Our performance was close to something like 60% versus 90% accuracy on average for various conditions. And there are other diseases that are absolutely critical to be identified in clinical practice. If I'm asking you, who among those two different patients, on the left and right, two different patients, one of them has a very serious condition called giant cell arteritis and arteritic ischemic optic neuropathy, it is not easy to, Clement, I don't know, it's not easy to answer this question. Well, because this is a situation that we see in books, and it's absolutely clear that an ischemic optic neuropathy of arteritic origins has a choked white disc, but this is versus a very sectorial altitudinal optic disc swelling, but this is not what we see in the real life. How do we know? Because we looked at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ischemic optic neuropathies, again, sent by many people from many countries. And I think that you will appreciate that, again, this comes from many continents. And then for testing, we wanted to do different cohorts. And all of a sudden, you probably noticed that Asia has somehow disappeared from the map. And the reason is quite clear. I see Clement smiling because arteritic ischemic optic neuropathies, they are still so rare, I think, in Asia for a very mysterious origin. I think this is one of the most hot topics, is this optic disc configuration. What's happening is genetics, is environment. It's a very, very hot topic. But we needed a significant numbers of AAION versus NAION in each cohort to be able to express the performance of the system. We just didn't have enough AAION cases, but we tested what we had. And again, we had using various models. I don't want to go into that. This is Shishun, our a wonderful AI engineer and other collaborators who have helped us with that. And again, we built a model, and one of the questions in this situation is, what is the most relevant part of the picture? What is the computer looking at? What are the pixels that have the highest significance? And this is a situation I'm sure you will easily say that this is probably an AION, and the machine said exactly the same. And then looking at the pixels that are the highest relevance, there was an inferior region for this. And we thought, oh, this is interesting. This is a bit what we are familiar with, and we're looking at the swelling not only on the fundus, but also on the visual fields. And this is the other situation. It's very clear, I think, to everyone that this is a AION with a choke disc. But now, and the machine performed extremely well, unsurprisingly, but the pattern, the heat map was quite different. Now you see a global area of interest, which is quite consistent with what we know with the process of ischemia. And then coming back to the first image, would you say this is AION or NAION? It's hard to say. It's hard to say. I wouldn't say this is AION, yet the machine said it is a AION. And this is exactly what it was. It was an atypical AION. Very scary, very, very scary. And look at the heat map, boom, it was a very large area of pixels, which was consistent. Now, the next thing that we asked ourselves, could we somehow try to formulate general rules to explain why is the machine making a judgment versus another? And for this reason, we superimposed all the pixels in each image in all the patients. And what a very, very interesting finding is that in AION, there was a scattered heat map all over the optic nerve. The circle is the optic nerve. It's a circle of 3.4 millimeters around the optic nerve versus a very localized area in NAION. This was very interesting. We published a couple of months ago those findings in JAMA Ophthalmology. And what is interesting, this is Aisha, Daniela, this is your corresponding PhD student, but here in Paris. And what is interesting is that Aisha, she's a mathematician. She did not know when she started her PhD how to write macula. She said, is it a K or is it a C? She had no idea. And within months, she could be the first author of a paper in JAMA. And we developed all those heat maps, and we showed that there's a difference of the distribution of the heat maps, central retinal artery occlusion versus vein occlusion versus NAION. And this led us to another investigation that we initiated here in Paris, is there a possibility to identify central retinal artery occlusions at the very beginning of the symptoms? This is not always easy. You know, the retinal edema, it's not easy to pick, requiring sometimes OCT, which is far better than fundus images. And with a question in mind, is there a time window for thrombolysis in CRAO? This is still very questionable issue. It is very disappointing to treat, as you all know, CRAO as opposed to strokes, which, treating strokes with thrombolysis is exceptionally useful but with the condition to treat this with, in a time window of 4.5 hours. And working on a similar method, we could show that a system looking at images with deep learning is able to identify CRAO within the first 4.5 hours. And this is super important, not for us ophthalmologists, because I think that we're able to do that most of the situations, but for patients going to a general emergency room or seeing a neurologist, or I cannot tell you how many neurologists are telling me that they are treating with thrombolysis patients with dry eyes in the United States. They were helicoptered for acute visual loss, and unnecessary thrombolysis can cause massive problems, brain bleeding, etc. But also, we don't know, we're not also selecting the right patients in the right time window. So those methods could have, we hope, or we believe their importance for appropriate selection of patients in the right time. So this is what we did for the time window of 4.5 hours. I'm not going to go too much into that. Again, we had the luck to recruit patients from various RCTs and also various centers who provide us the patient. Again, training, testing, this is the detail of the study. I don't think it's very important, but what we wanted to do is to discriminate between patients with CRAO and normals. That's the most difficult situation. Is it CRAO or is it a normal fundus, but also NAION, CRBO, and other conditions that are common as a cause of visual loss in elderly patients, and the performance was very good. And the last study I want to talk about is that all those studies that I'm showing you, and most of the deep learning studies are retrospectively done. And it is quite understood and accepted by everyone that we are still in a very young age of deep learning where the cases are somehow cherry-picked. And that's what we did. We asked all our collaborators just to send us their best cases, the most typical cases, to train the model with the best available situations. But how applicable is that in our real life situations? It's far less clear. That's the reason why there are very few deep learning methods that have systems that have been FDA approved, because validation in real life condition is difficult. So we had a study that has been conducted at SNEC using portable cameras, and we developed using Bullseye on those non-mydriatic images, still had good results. And this is the detail of the study with very good performance. And the very last thing that I would like to discuss with you is that what is the next frontier of AI? What is the use of all this? Well, everything we're trying to do today with deep learning is prediction. Trying to move from prediction to inspiration, to try to make the machine learn by itself, by unsupervised methods, in very, very large data sets. That's one of the next goals. And we are very privileged in ophthalmology. This is a foundational model that has been created, the RedFound, published in Nature by Perskine and others 1 or 2 years ago, from 1.6 million images, developing a very general framework that could be very helpful and that you could use. And interestingly enough, this is an open source model that every one of you can use just by adding just limited numbers. You don't need to include 15,000 patients with papilledema because you will never have them. But you can use 1.6 million images that have pre-trained a model, and you can refine that with just a couple of hundreds or thousands of patients with papilledema, let's say, to get to the same results. And in fact, this has morphed now to a global RedFound consortium, and this will probably be the first model in medicine, way beyond ophthalmology. And you recognize Yi-Chung Tam, who's from NUS, but also other major co-authors like Carol Cheung from Hong Kong. And they gathered more than 200 of us across the world to contribute to this global model. So in conclusion, I think that AI can help for neuro-ophthalmic diagnosis and probably also neurodegenerative diseases, which is more challenging, but also more intellectually interesting. So AI is here to stay, hopefully for the best, but we also have to be very careful. And this is a truism. There are ethical considerations that you're all familiar with. What we don't want to is to come to these situations where the robots will fear us. That should be the opposite. Thank you very much for your invitation again. I'm open to questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Prof. Milea, for a wonderful talk. The floor is open for questions. I'm pretty sure Prof. Dan has a few questions.
First of all, Dan, it's really lovely to see you again, and I miss all our very intellectually stimulating conversations in so many ways. And you know, I like this last picture. There is But to start with the questions, there is a scene from iRobot, a modern adaptation of the Isaac Asimov novel with Will Smith, where the key challenge is, did you ask the right question? And if Will Smith did not ask the right question, then the AI then would not give him any answers. So, the first question I have is, now AI has become very popular, very sexy, and everybody from Nvidia down to your neighborhood, the neighborhood mom and pop store wants to use AI for something, right? And the question, and so it makes me wonder, when those of us who are interested in developing AI models for anything, how should we be thinking around this question? In other words, this is not quite like ChatGPT and you ask them, plan me a holiday in Japan, but in deep learning, there is a specific line of questioning that has to take place. And what would you say that line of questioning is?
Well, so you're talking about AI in general for medical purposes, right? As opposed to
That's right. So I mean,
right.
when we say we want bonsai, for example, is a great case because you're saying, is this papilledema or no? Right. So it's a very specific question for the AI, but we are now beginning to ask slightly less specific questions.
Absolutely. Right.
How should we think about this?
Right. So I think there are many ways to look at that. So number one, do we want a system for diagnosis or do we want it just as a support? So I think that's a very important, philosophically very different approach. Do we want a software to help us physicians, or as what happens with DR, for instance, diabetic retinopathy, or you want the machine just stay there, do your job, and you know what? It's the company that's going to go to a trial if there is a mistake, as opposed as if you use the machine just for yourself. If you are using your OCT or Heidelberg or Cyrus, what have you, and you make an error, it's going to be you or me seeing the judge, obviously, right? So that, I think that is a very important. What do we want those machines to achieve? And I would probably say it depends a lot about the purposes. The other thing is also, do we want our system was quite primitive, I have to say. Bonsai is, although I think potentially useful, it's still very primitive. Papilledema versus rest. Now there are many other who have developed other systems that can discriminate 20, 30 diseases at the same time. And that is also something more important, especially if you couple that with large language models and also with clinical questions. And I think that the performance of a system will jump immediately if you associate, just add the age, a kid age 15, chances to have AION is really zero. So adding those clinical information, so going from symptom to diagnosis or suspected diagnosis is probably the next thing. It is not achieved yet. Very few algorithms take into account the symptom. So as you say, asking the right question is absolutely critical, but now is the algorithm able to generate the right question, or is the algorithm able to pick the right symptom in a large mass of symptoms? We all know about those AI scribes that can interpret what's happening in a dialogue between the patient and the doctor. So it is a very complex question, Clement. You're absolutely right. Time will tell.
Follow on question from that, right? Because in the old scientific method that I guess a lot of us grew up with, before you could publish a paper, you'd have to have a postulated pathophysiological mechanism for your test, right? If you didn't have one and you just said, well, it shows this, no one would accept that paper for publication. The thing now is with AI, we have a heat map. But that doesn't, it just tells us what the computer is looking at, but not the potential pathophysiology. But we are somehow ready to trust the AI. And so do you see this as a really huge paradigm shift in the way we think. We no longer have to prove pathophysiology in a sense.
Right, but that's a very good question, and obviously people want to know, do I know, I took a plane last night, do I know how a plane, the mechanism of how a plane functions? No, but I know that somebody does know. So I think that is important. So explainability is one of the big issues, as you mentioned, and the AI world moves more and more into explainability. So I think that in the end, we should be able to understand everything. Why is that system making that decision, not only for statistical reasons but in terms of pathophysiology? And that's the next all the AGI, the general artificial intelligence that will end up probably teaching us or reclassifying diseases. So I hope that in 5 or 10 years we'll understand more, and those systems will explain us more or lead us towards new frontiers. But
Fantastic.
today, I agree. Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead. No, I was just about to say thank you. Yeah.
I still think today we have to accept, you jump on a plane, although you don't know everything about it. So I think we have to accept that not everything is acceptable, as long as statistically the responses are powerful and the performance is good. I think it's somehow acceptable. What do you think?
Dan. Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I know that as you said, somebody knows how the plane flies and has gone through the mechanism of it now. But at the moment, for some of the AI, no one's gone through the mechanism of it yet. So I guess it leaves it does leave room for us to feel a little bit anxious sometimes, in as much as the statistics are great.
Yeah, agree.
Okay, but I probably shouldn't hog all the question time with Dan. So please, Ray, Daniela, before I
So
start having
what
more
other
interesting.
things? What other things? Ray, Daniela, what do you think? You guys are heavily involved in those things.
No, I mean, to me, I'm very happy to listen to both you and Clement discuss about this, because that's really the important topic here. Now, do we understand everything? I agree with Clement. We don't understand everything about AI, but again, we're starting to have more explainable models, and definitely heat maps are starting to emerge, to make sense, as you showed it, Dan, to be linked better to clinical relevance and the clinical books. My question is actually, will it be able to teach us new things in the books that were not there? And I think that's the exciting bit here. When you start looking at heat map, instead of saying, hey, that doesn't make sense, so that picture I'm going to exclude because it doesn't make sense, is it actually that picture that will add to the textbooks? And this is where the averaged heat maps or the combo of heat maps start making more and more sense. But this is exciting, because I also agree with Clement that this is scary, because you need to be open to it, and you need to be able to accept it. But again, very interesting topic.
I still think that we have somehow a very anthropomorphic approach to this. If the machine explains us something that we already know, we think the machine must be very good.
Right. Dan, maybe I have a quick question, and because the models are becoming better and better, now we're focusing always on one disease, but for instance, for papilledema, I remember we looked at this, but I don't know if the model was refined since then. If a patient had another condition like glaucoma, or had other conditions more in the retina, did this affect the performance of the model? Because we haven't bringing it more to real life setting, right? Would that affect the performance, you think?
You mean if there were multiple
conditions? Yes, because papilledema itself would originate from the brain. I mean, it will be an intracranial hypertension, right? What if the patient has underlying optic nerve head or optic neuropathies?
Right. So that was a multi-system task would be great, and that should be probably happening in the end. As you say, when we looked at glaucoma, the performance was quite poor, and in fact, we excluded all the glaucoma patients because, I mean, there is still, there is such a big interest in glaucoma, and to detect glaucoma, it's potentially blinding disease. There is no algorithm on the market that can do that at a level to be FDA approved, as you know. So I still think there's a lot of work to do. The reason for glaucoma is that the ground truth is very shaky. So as opposed to papilledema, because in our situation, papilledema was something that we knew exactly. It was visible on the fundus, but also we had lumbar punctures, we had brain MRIs. So there was something subserving our diagnosis in glaucoma. You probably need to look at patients who get worse over time, progression is so slow. So it's super complicated. But you are absolutely right.
Right. Daniela, do you have any questions for Prof Milea?
Thank you, Prof Dan, for the talk. It was very insightful. My questions go hand in hand with the discussion that you were just having just now. So first, I was thinking throughout the talk about how AI is currently used for diagnostic purposes, and I was thinking if we can get to a point where we understand how it's working, to be able to move from diagnosis to more mechanistic insights, but I think this was addressed already. So the second question was more on the ethical aspect or ethical considerations, especially since AI cannot be held accountable. And you mentioned that neuro-ophthalmic error can be dramatic. So how do you think we can account for this? Because I was thinking if we increase let it tolerate more false positives, but this might be counterproductive. So what do you think is a good trade-off?
Well, that's a very good question. So I always thought that that sensitivity is probably the most important parameter, but as you suggest, it's probably not true, because low specificity, you can achieve that. So if you have a low specificity because you're aiming too high for sensitivity, that will create a lot of false positives with a high burden on the system. So you create more problems than what you solve. So I think that it should be, in fact, a tailored threshold. So basically, I don't think there should be one size all. Those systems should be tailored to the needs of a specific clinic, for instance, or to the capacities of a system. How do you have access to MRI, to other investigations? I think there shouldn't be one size fits all. But then that also means that people who are going to I'm not sure everybody agrees with what I'm saying here. Other things that, no, wait a minute. If you want to detect a heart attack, you just do it. You cannot say, in Africa, the sensitivity should be this, and in Sweden, different. So it is a very questionable point. I don't know if I'm answering the question.
Dan, did we factor in, maybe just to follow up on Daniela on your question, did we factor in the expertise of the person? Because yes, from our study, I mean, emergency doctors, when evaluating papilledema, the performance was much lower than AI. So is the responsibility in terms of ethics and who's responsible for misdiagnosis, do we factor in the expertise as well? Shouldn't that be factored in? Where do you use the model?
No, but I agree. How do you even judge that expertise? It's very difficult. But so in terms of responsibility, the answers are quite clear today, is that it depends what you want to do with your machine. If it's for as an assistive way, it's still, as I said this at the beginning, it's the doctor's responsibility. If it's diagnostic, it's the machine's, the manufacturer's responsibility. But I fully agree with you. This should be, how much can we do if we're facing machine provided by diagnosis? What are the consequences? I fully agree with you. That should be factored in.
Maybe the answer Sorry,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Go, no, please.
You know, maybe the answer is not going to be immediately apparent because if you remember one of the very first successful AIs in ophthalmology, it was diabetic retinopathy, right? Tianyin's what's the name of that? Selena, right? But
No.
they only answered a very simple question: preferable diabetic retinopathy or not? Yes or no, right? Bonsai is one step up from that. So we're getting well. Although it's still a yes or no answer, but we're still at the stage for some of these things where as assistive, they answer a very because of whom they were targeted at. So Selena was targeted at your general physician who cannot who's not trained to make that decision. So for them it was just a yes or no. Tell me, do I refer this patient? And so it was quite successful in that because they erred on the side of they trained the model to err on the side of being cautious, right? So we moved up from that to Bonsai, where they give you a more definitive answer and confidence intervals instead of just yes or no. So I think we'll gradually evolve. The system will gradually move to the stage where it gives us, increasing levels of confidence, but we'll have to wait.
Right. So I think that this is also a right time to include another point, which is critical, which Selena addressed, is also the economics of the thing.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with, what's the population of in Singapore that has diabetes? 10%, I guess, 10, 15%.
20% of 6 million. Yeah.
So these are big numbers. So there is a big need. There is large applications, and also, let's face it, there are, it's a very boring task to look at patients with diabetes who have nothing, in fact. So can you afford to pay doctors and their time and to stress the system? So I still think that there's a very, very important value for that, as opposed to Bonsai, which is, how many people are really interested to diagnose papilledema? Probably very few, very, very few. It's emergency rooms, some neurologists maybe. So cost effectiveness, that's another very important issue that has to be integrated when deciding when is this going to happen in real life.
Interesting. Daniela? We have a Q&A.
We
have one question. Maybe I can ask it then. I think your last slide scared a lot of people. So the question is there many ethical questions and confusion around AI? In your opinion, do we ever need to be concerned about AI taking over, like in the illustration you showed on the last slide? And I guess I'll invite also Clement to chip in on that. It's not an easy answer.
It was an easy answer. It is an easy answer. I'm very concerned. And it'll happen, and we have to be very, very careful.
I'm just hoping it will happen after I'm dead. maybe I'll have a Krispy Kreme a day just to make sure.
Very big concern, I think. Absolutely. Remember, there was Elon Musk, who wanted, he wanted to stop everything, all the research and on AI. Remember? 2-3 years ago.
So if we're worried about AI taking over, my personal point of view is yes, but I don't want to paint it as a negative thing. Eventually, there will be more involvement and more need for AI. But going back to what I asked earlier, why can't we rely more on AI when, for example, in the emergency department, there's a need for that tool to make sure that patient doesn't die in the evening because we missed. So why can't we reduce the responsibility of who makes the call and who is responsible for that call in a situation where there's a high chance of mistake? I feel that would be a good point to defend, right?
Yeah, 100% agree with you. So there are, you probably are familiar with the fundamental theory of informatics, which claims that a human using a machine is much better than either of those two methods independently, right? And that was a fundamental concept,
right,
which is not true anymore. So there are several tests, including in the health space, showing that the machines are far better. A machine alone will do a better judgment than a human and the machine under the understanding that the human is controlling and deciding what the machine suggests. And that is becoming very scary. So would you trust an AI if its performance is better than a human plus AI? It is, as humans, it's very difficult to accept, but at some point there will be studies and to make the call.
Awesome. Okay, if there are no further questions, maybe Clement, any other additional points from your side before we conclude?
No, I agree with Dan, that and yourself, but I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing that that we get the machines to take over some of the things we do. I mean, at least at the moment, their chief advantage is their consistency. That's the chief advantage, and I don't see why we shouldn't take advantage of that, right? If it delivers better care for the patients overall, we should take full advantage of that. But it will take steps. It may not be a patient walking into emergency and, like the old Chinese physician, they put the finger on the pulse and say, "Oh, you're pregnant." It's not going to do that, but it will help with various aspects, especially when we are caught in decision making. So I look forward to those. Actually, I think those are going to be helpful, in as much as it leads to the fear that they'll take over the world. But at least for now, it'll help.
Absolutely.
But I have to ask that question in the Q&A. Sorry, Vicky, that we're taking a couple more minutes, and then I'll pass it to Daniela. Will non-ophthalmologist practitioners lose touch to diagnose ophthalmological issues in the future, since they can rely on AI?
So you mean, are we going to lose our jobs? Is that what you're asking?
Well, we're talking about non-ophthalmologists. Non-ophthalmologist practitioners. Will they lose interest, or would they lose their capacity and their capability to at least practice ophthalmology or practice some aspects?
Oh, I understand. Yeah, that you know what? That is already happening for radiologists. The number of candidates to do radiology has dropped massively in the United States. You're absolutely right. Okay. But yes, I agree.
I think what will happen is they'll stop referring it to ophthalmologists, so we'll be out of a job because they won't refer it to us anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
Daniela, any points from your side before we conclude?
It was a great talk. We learned a lot about how really the eye is a window to the brain, and also the systemic health. And I think I learned that we should try to be smarter than AI and to just stay on its good side, because if not, it will backfire. I'm not sure how, but I think we have to figure it out very soon.
Just say thank you, please, to ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Yes, say thank you and please to ChatGPT.
Okay. With that, Dan, thanks a lot for really a fantastic talk and for sharing about
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. That was great.
Awesome discussions. Yeah. I love those discussions.
That was great. No, that was a great talk. Thank you.
And for everyone, thanks for joining. And remember, the next session is on November 25th. So not in December. So November 25th, and 2 Tuesdays. Stay tuned. We have Prof Kazu Tsubota from Japan, who will also be talking about innovations in myopia and other aspects in ophthalmology and beyond. So again, thanks a lot, Dan, Clement, Daniela. Thanks a lot for a wonderful session, and we'll see you the next round.
See you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye.